in various sectors, and which institutions still have the trust of the public. I'm proud to say that independent broadcasters are faring particularly well in how South Africans actually feel about us.
Thanks for having me, Naledi. Yes, I think it's a credit to the work that you and your colleagues do that trust in independent broadcasters is the highest rate of trust of all the institutions that we measured. But I think we should also say that the state broadcaster, the SABC, also receives very good marks from South Africans. So I think one thing that we can appreciate from this survey is that the media is a very important part of South Africa's democracy, and one institution that is trusted by most people to inform us about what is happening. So I think it speaks to South Africans appreciating the need for an independent and government media to reach people and inform us about what's happening, but also a sort of mark of appreciation for the work that has been done over the last few years as well.
Yeah, and just to look at some of those numbers, just to be clear here, and you're right, it's the media across the board, because independent broadcasters have 63% of trust from South Africans, 61% for government broadcasters. So really, across the board, very good news for how the media is doing. Not so good news for some of our political parties. Opposition parties right at the bottom of the list. In fact, 24% trust in some of our opposition leaders. And then when we get to government and local government, very interesting, since we're heading into local government elections, terrible levels of trust there as well. Do we know why this is?
Yeah, so I think that's an important trend to sort of unpack about the findings, is that a lot of the least trusted institutions in South Africa are actually institutions that rely on public election, for example. So you mentioned there local councils, political parties, members of parliament as well, also get very low levels of confidence from the South African public. So I think this speaks to a disconnect that South Africans at large have between their elected representatives and what they want from them. So I think people are very dissatisfied with their elected representatives and institutions which are supposed to represent the public's interest. Yeah. And yes, this really couldn't have come at a sort of worse time when we're entering into local government elections as well. But the important thing, I think, to take away from the survey is that we've asked this question for several years in a row now. Afrobarometer has been conducting surveys for 20 years in South Africa. So what we can actually do is we can compare people's trust in various institutions over time. And what we're seeing is that since about 2011, so over the last decade really, public confidence has really declined over the last decade in almost across the board, in courts, the president, elected institutions as well. And what we're seeing is that this is a decline in public trust. So it bears itself out in low voter registration, voter apathy, and also in a lack of authority that institutions have over the public as a whole.
Yeah, and for me, the concern is a lot of the trust sort of measurements sitting under 50%. For the majority of the sectors that you've covered, and you've looked at traditional leaders all the way down to religious leaders. Just to touch on this, opposition parties have 24% trust of South Africans. The ruling party only sitting at 27% itself, so not a very confident position that it should be in as well. The courts of law sitting at 43%. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing for how South Africans view the judiciary, who essentially should be protecting the very integrity of our democracy. What have you put down then as recommendations on how we boost the confidence of South Africans in some of our institutions?
Yeah, I guess that's the really important question, is not to just look at why things are bad, but how they can be improved as well. So I think one thing that's important to consider when looking at these findings is why public opinion has changed over the last decade. And when we look at this, we put it quite a lot down to various factors which are beyond individual institutions' control. So, for example, we've had very poor economic growth. We've seen the rise in unemployment, as revealed by Stats SA yesterday. Inequality is still a massive problem in South Africa. So these are huge macroeconomic trends that will be very difficult to reverse. But some things are much easier to do than others, for example. So corruption, we know, is a major issue that has really affected people's confidence in various institutions. So the ability for oversight institutions like the court to ensure that functioning of institutions is correct and transparent is inhibited by corruption in these various institutions.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons perhaps that the media is so well regarded by many people is because it's willing to expose corruption, it's willing to expose malfeasance in these various institutions. Yeah. So I think a more transparent set of governance, better oversight controls, and just really a willingness to show that corruption should be punished, it shouldn't be tolerated. This is something that we think would help people to have a better sense of trust in these various institutions as well.
Yeah.
I think a lot of South Africans at the moment are feeling quite despondent about the state of their governance and political alternatives at the moment. So what we really need is a fresh injection of confidence that the government is showing that it's willing to respond to corruption, that it's willing to provide better services. But, increasingly what we're seeing is that people have very little faith that this will happen, of course.
Yeah, and the only way really we're going to rebuild that faith is by actually doing the work and proving to South Africans that the intentions are in the right place and that we're able to reach the goals that we set ourselves. That's how I'd feel. Mikhail, thank you so much for speaking to us. Mikhail Moosa, project leader there for the South African Reconciliation Barometer. Which institutions do you still have faith in South Africa? Tweet at ETV News SA. Let's move on to